I was back in the States for less than a week before I started traveling again. This time I went to High Ground, an annual unconference about design in all of its forms held in the mountains of Colorado. I was invited as a kitchen scholar, maybe now called emerging associate by the end of the weekend. Regardless, basically my job was to help host in exchange for attendance.
Wants to work in a more creative way, in a more engaging way with their colleagues, and wishes to gain more meaning, and I think I'll bring up this term meaning as more important than uniqueness or disruption or innovation and what people need from their work.
The conceit is that the visitors to the gallery are not really going to know that they're engaged in playing a game. I'm composing a large, like a 60-inch on diameter LED screen with a very discrete web camera as a sensor. And the space that is in the composition will be the bough of a mesquite tree. And if no one is around to watch the work, then monarch butterflies will come and alight on the bough of the mesquite tree. And if anyone comes to view the work, the butterflies will fly away and will not return. I'm using the butterflies metaphorically and literally. San Antonio is on the monarch butterfly migration path. And as we may or may not know, the monarch butterfly migration is at least the longest documented natural migration by a species, not human. And so they go from central Mexico to Canada. And interestingly, I found out in the course of the research, they do not flock. So there's a kind of an emergent pattern to their migration. They don't. They just go individually. They all each decide to go, and so they're not following each other. This is, of course, a kind of a trans-species discussion about migration itself. Because to celebrate the 300th anniversary of San Antonio's founding is to celebrate the colonial project of the Spaniards taking the land from the indigenous there. I grew up in San Antonio, so I have a kind of connection.
I'd been before a few times as a kid, and exploring the same landscapes I had when I was maybe half my height was an interesting experience. I recognized some hills or rock formations, but at a totally different scale, like someone else's dream. The landscape wasn't the only thing I was recontextualizing, though, as us kitchen scholars were suddenly asked to give the wrap-up presentations, to synthesize what the conversations had been and where to go from here. Here's my piece. One topic that ran through a lot of the talks was about the ethics of design. The ethics and meaning driving art, and how we can inform and enact the ethics of our work. The way to inform these ethics is through contextualization. And in this way, ethics may be better stated as goals or messages, the way that you, as an artist, designer, teacher, want to push the world. This contextualization is another topic brought up a lot, and comes from listening to a diversity of voices typically not heard, and believing what they need. It also comes from shifting your viewpoint between the micro and the macro, to look at the components and the system in even amounts, and continually swapping between them. For example, perhaps we want to change education to an open and more radical thing, and this is an admirable, long-term goal. But you, as an individual or a small group, still live in the current system, and want to do what you can in the present, in the short term. No individual, no matter how admirable or heinous, is a system. So how can I change a system? Maybe you can't. But what you can do is leverage what power you currently have. Say, by making a new master's program that pushes towards that new system. In this way, switching between the micro and the macro, applying different scope and scale to the same ideas, is also the way to act on your ethical goals. The way to make disruptions with what you have and what you would ideally have. But in the constant critique of your disruption through scale, it becomes necessary to critique the notion of disruption itself.
the recontextualizing through a diversity of voices is important. Because what is new about your disruption if the same people are still left behind, still unheard? How revolutionary are you being if you pull the rug out from under people who have nothing but the rug? The challenge for everyone, especially myself, is how to let people fail fast when historically and currently one failure means the end. In 2015, the average debt held by a bachelor graduate borrower was $30,100, up over 50% from 10 years prior, and it's only gone up from then. We understand the principles of disruption. You have not failed in teaching us that.
Thank you.
But there's a lot less room for us to fail. The good news is, you can still fail. You still hold the leverage to change, to be the mouthpiece, the advocate for people who don't get to mess up as much, for those who don't have the same backup. I, for one, would really appreciate it. We have grown up in a time when we are expected to have just a single chance. Who better to invest in than someone who has spent years and years calculating the risk of just one shot at success, to capitalize as hard as possible on it? So disrupt. Raise hell. Continue your frontline crusade. But if you don't see us right there with you, remember, we want to fight. We're trying to fight. But we have to be careful where we tread, because if we stumble, trip, fall, there might not be someone there to pick us back up.
So that's going to be on your YouTube channel?
Yeah. Check it out this Monday.
Okay.